Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
Today's warehouse needs to keep inventory moving smoothly and quickly. Meet these challenges with on-demand warehouse labeling from Brother Mobile Solutions. Our mobile and industrial printers will help optimize your operations to achieve the speed, reliability, and durability your warehouse needs. With easy integration for existing warehouse technology, convenient portability, and upfront affordability, Brother Mobile Solutions is at your side when it comes to warehouse labeling. Try one for free today by visiting brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse or click the link in the show notes. That's brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse to try one for free today.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Anthony Moschella. He is the SVP of Product Management at Vecna Robotics. And we're going to talk a little bit about a recent survey that they conducted and kind of dive into the current state of warehouse automation. And we're going to focus a little bit too on user experience within the industrial space and talk a little bit about their partnership with Geodis and how that's going to come into play and what to expect there. So, Anthony, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, Kevin. Really happy to be here.
Definitely happy to talk to you. Happy to get Vecna back on the show. It's been a little bit. I'm definitely happy to dive into some of these topics with you today as well. So for those that are not familiar, give us a little bit of a brief overview of Vecna before we dive into some of this stuff.
Sure, happy to. So Vecna Robotics is a company that's focused on vehicular robotics for warehouse automation. So essentially we build robotic forklifts focused on full pallet moves inside the warehouse, inside the distribution center, inside the manufacturing center. So all of our equipment is designed to work in an infrastructure-free way, meaning that we see and navigate the facility in the same way that a human does. One of the big focuses of Vecna Robotics, and I think one of the big differentiators from us as a company, is that we're really taking a human-first approach towards robotics. And what I mean by that is that we're trying to build systems that are not designed to get humans entirely out of the warehouse or entirely out of the factory, but we're building systems where robots can work closely with humans to implement advanced workflows in new ways. So partially what I mean by that is when we go into a facility or we go into a new customer, we try to look at the entire workflow, the entire set of operations that's happening in this facility and identify which pieces are suited to automation, which pieces are suited to humans, and redistribute those workloads accordingly. And kind of fundamentally, that's the approach that we're taking. And I think it's the right approach. I think it's a bit of a unique approach.
Interesting. And I think, it's an interesting approach too. Definitely. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'm curious, you guys recently conducted a survey and kind of looking at the current state of warehouse automation. So talk to us a little bit about, before we dive into some of the nuances of Vecna and some of those more detailed things, like tell us kind of where are we based on those results and some of the findings and what is that current state of warehouse automation?
Yeah, so the warehouse industry is in a really interesting place right now in that obviously the need for automation is crystal clear to everyone.
Right.
And, if you talk to hiring managers or you talk to ops managers, you're seeing, close to 100%, 98, 99% of warehouse operations leads are looking to bring in automation in the near term, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone is looking at it, but I think at the same time there's still a little bit of an element of fear of what is actually possible at these sites, what makes sense. Like, people don't want to lose, people don't want to take on, there's fear, there's a risk of bringing in this new technology into the facility. What's it going to do to my workers? What's it going to do to my existing employees? How are we going to make this system work as a system? And so I think in general, you're seeing a little bit of a slower uptick than you might expect. Everyone is looking, but not everyone is acting. And I think people are still trying to kind of gather information and kind of overcome some of that fear and uncertainty. You contrast this with the manufacturing space, legacy automotive, EVs, big manufacturing. They've got a much more kind of sophisticated perspective on automation. They've been using legacy automation for 30, 40 years.
Right.
And I think in those sites, the challenges are a little bit more of how do you integrate, this current next gen of truly autonomous automation into facilities that have been using, guided vehicles or repetitive arm-based robotics for decades. So there's a mindset shift there. So these things are kind of working almost a little bit cross purposes that the big legacy auto guys are trying to figure out how to integrate advanced robotics into their legacy robotics. And the warehouse customers are trying to figure out how to get their foot in the door and find a way to make it useful.
Interesting. And I want to talk a little bit about that from the warehousing perspective. You mentioned the fear there that sometimes lies. And I think that's been, not only around robotics and automation, but around systems and things like that for a long time. It's, it's kind of the old mindset of, why fix something that's not broken? Or, maybe we have these systems that we've held together with, paper clips and bubble gum for so long, we're afraid to just pull out that paper clip and have everything fall apart, right? So I mean, as you engage with these potential customers and people that are, looking towards automation and trying to figure that out, I mean, how do you, and for people that are listening, I mean, how would you address that fear and tell them not to be afraid, basically, we can make this happen, right?
So time and time again, I go into these facilities and I'm meeting with the people you're describing, right? Some of them are kind of more old school ops guys, right? But in general, people who are running these operations are very sophisticated. They're not, this is a high complexity environment. These are not simple problems, right? I mean, just the human, forget about automation. Just running a warehouse is a very complex operation that requires a lot of technical analysis, a lot of data. And most of the people who are doing this at scale understand this, right? And they are very, very sophisticated. And the challenge is always where do we fit this in and in what way, right? So I think a lot of people, first of all, start with this premise we need to automate the entire warehouse for this to happen. Or I need to rip up my racking, or I need to rip up my dock plan, or I need to rip up my consoles. And the answer to that is that's not the case, right? I think, for a lot of these customers, we can say, hey, here's a sort of more simplified, scaled engagement where we demonstrate utility on 2 dock doors or 4 dock doors. And again, getting back to where that kind of Vecna premise of we are designing the system to work in conjunction with human operators. So you don't have to replace your staff with robots. Your staff can work around our robots because our technology is designed that way. And so in general, that's my kind of first part. Is we're not here to replace your workers with robots. We're here to look at your system and identify where to deploy in a way that makes sense. The second piece that I try to bring to kind of address the uncertainty is how we can relatively provide a turnkey operation in terms of IT integration, WMS integration, whatever other site integration needs to happen. Kind of the first layer of that is that we don't need infrastructure in the facility. We don't need markers. We don't need wire guidance. We don't need anything. Our robots map and see like humans. The second piece, though, is we have a very flexible API that can integrate into your existing IT environment. Right? So we'll run under Wi-Fi. If you don't have Wi-Fi, we can bring in 5G. If you don't want 5G, we can run on public 5G. We can work with over almost any WMS that we've been created, including your custom ones. So we're trying to kind of take some of that friction out of it. But the final piece of it is that we will try to say, okay, once we have this in place, let's figure out this workflow for the robot that makes sense in your facility. So it's a standard distribution center, let's say. Maybe we can handle, high volume, horizontal movement from dock to staging. You've got a VNA operation. You've got high reach drivers. our robots are maybe clearing 2 to 4, 6 of your dock doors and just handling that horizontal movement, staging pallets all day. Or you can consider how we could use robotics for a cross-docking operation. So again, when we come with sort of a more turnkey workflow that fits into what's happening inside your facility, I think that takes some of the fear away. The other thing that I think people are concerned about is what is it going to be like to actually interact with this equipment, have this equipment in my facility.
Right.
And one of the other things, honestly, the main reason I joined Vecna Robotics was that we've developed a service that we call the Pivotal Command Center, which is basically a teleoperation and remote monitoring layer that is staffed 24/7, 365 by Vecna employees. So when I'm talking to a new warehouse customer, I try to give them the confidence that, hey, we have people at our site who are monitoring these robots all the time, handling the edge cases, handling any problems that are going to come up. And typically we know more about what's going on in your facility than you do, right? We've got this layer of data, this layer of analytics, this layer of intelligence that gives us a really, really powerful perspective as to what's going on. So this is sort of the way we get over kind of that fear of what happens when my robot gets stuck? What happens when my robot what happens when the pallet wrapper covers the pallet openings? What happens when the pallets are broken, right? And 99 times out of 100, our remote operations team can handle this edge case without any intervention at the site.
Interesting.
The other big value of this, and this is something that we're just kind of starting to deploy at scale, is that because we have this intelligence about what's going on at your facility, we can actually make recommendations to improve operations. So, for example, our Pivotal Command Center agents can say, hey, we see a lot of stops around this door. We can go even further to say the reason we see some of these stops there is because the janitor leaves the cart there when he goes on smoke break, right? And so we can say hey, you should train your janitor to move the cart here, and then you'll see better performance in the robot. And so if you imagine that at a larger and larger scale, we can actually suggest different staging operations, different amounts of buffering for pallets, different routes, and all of this gets kind of rolled back into your operation for increased efficiency.
Very interesting. And I think it's a great focus, as you mentioned here a couple of times. Focusing on that human element of it. I think that, for so long when we started to see robotics really kind of take off within the warehousing space and people get interested, it was very much the conversation when are we going to lights out warehousing, right? And I think then it evolved into that. Well, that's very, very far off into the future, right? But how do we come up with solutions where, robots can work alongside, as you said, work alongside humans and be able to, supplement that work and make humans more productive and, take them off things that they don't necessarily want to do anyway in the first place, right? So, in that sense, a lot of that comes down to the user experience, as you mentioned. So, I'm curious from your perspective and maybe Vecna's perspective, how important, what's more important, the software and what the human is interacting with, or the hardware itself?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
The software is everything, right? The software is everything, and that interaction layer is increasingly going to become a software-first interaction layer. So you talk about the lights out warehouse, and I think sort of fundamentally that's the wrong goal.
Right.
I think there's not, I'm never going to say never. Obviously, there's a bunch of investment in these advanced ASRS type systems, but the world is messy. The world is messy, and pallets get broken, and things go wrong, right? And I don't think that's really the right approach to this. even at massive scale, even with massive infrastructure dollars. I think instead there are aspects of warehouse work that actually are, really good jobs for human beings, and I think satisfying, fulfilling, and kind of growth enabling jobs for human beings, as well as jobs that may continue to make sense for human beings. I mean, one of the warehouses that we work in, our workflow is we have robots staging pallets for high reach put away. Right? So we take from the dock, humans unload the trucks, we pick up our pallets at the dock, we drop them off in aisle where a swivel truck operator puts them away. Right? Very, very standard operation.
Yeah.
And what I found at this facility is that, swivel truck drivers or high reach drivers, these are actually very high skill positions. They're very well paid positions. And I think in general, the operators I talk to have really, really high job satisfaction because they recognize the high skill work they're doing and the high value work they're doing, and they're appropriately compensated for it, right? And so I think there's, obviously it's still hard to hire people into these roles, but I don't think we should take this kind of knee-jerk reaction that working in a warehouse is necessarily not a fulfilling job or not a satisfying job. Right. I think there are aspects of it that could be, and those are probably the areas to focus on. To go back to your original question about UI or user experience, I think ultimately the way to look at it is having a layer of data analytics improves the experience for everyone, right? The ops manager, the worker, the associates on the floor, the truck drivers. It's the data always is going to improve the situation. The example I always use is, I live in New York City and I can get an Uber driver or I can get a yellow cab, right? They're both human beings driving a car, but the Uber's driver has this layer of data intelligence that can make the whole fleet operate in a better and more efficient way, right? And I think that's really the right metaphor, right mental model to use for this, because in that scenario, now me as the customer has a better experience because I can call the car. I know when it's going to arrive. I know it's going to get dropped off. The driver has a better experience because he or she knows that they're operating in the most optimal way. They're getting the maximum number of fares possible. And then the fleet can operate in the best way, and that we all know where the best routes are. And if you can imagine that kind of scaled down into the warehouse, having a layer of software that coordinates human and robot activity really becomes key, right? And I think that's ultimately the mission that Vecna has, is that we're going to build this sort of human-first system in which we want human drivers to have better and more efficient experiences. We want robots to be handling the lowest value tasks in the facility. We want the whole thing to work together in a way that provides clear analytics up to everyone who's looking at the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think it's a very good way to look at it. And I love the comparison to, the Uber versus the cab, right? Because you talk about that additional layer that's in between there. And, you think about looking for an Uber versus looking for a cab. You're standing on the street corner just waiting for a cab to maybe drive by, right? Whereas an Uber, exactly it's 6 minutes away, right? So I can hang out inside my hotel for a couple more minutes and now I'll pop out right when it's going to come out. So I mean, having that and translating that over, I mean, I think is such an interesting thing, right? And in your background, I mean, you spent time at Peloton and Facebook, which is very much consumer facing brands, right? Product interaction, user experience is incredibly important there, right? So, I mean, in that sense too, as you talk about jobs being fulfilling within the warehousing industry and people finding value within those jobs, I mean, how do you see that having that better user interface and user interfaces that are similar to what we're accustomed to in our everyday lives outside of work? I mean, how does that contribute to not only better satisfaction within the job and fulfillment within that job, but also in the sense of attracting and retaining employees within the warehouse space?
I mean, it's absolutely essential, right? And I think looking at how most humans are used to using technology in really sophisticated ways right now, right? We all use smartphones, we use these devices, and we're used to it, right? We wear Apple Watches. It's integrated into our world. And to push against that, to push against using those tools in these environments feels like the wrong approach. So you kind of start at the warehouse associate level. Like, I think building very simple and flexible interfaces for different aspects of the warehouse flow is invaluable, right? And whether those run on your scanner gun or run on a wearable or through a voice picking system, the notion of having like clear direction of what you're going to do is valuable for every employee. And I think at the same time, hand in hand with that is analytics about your performance. You know, a lot's been said about this sort of surveillance-y aspect of like warehouse worker measuring pick performance or measuring drop-off performance. But I think at the end of the day, most workers actually do want to have some level, they want metrics, they want to know how they're performing. Really, I think in almost every job, and especially if you're implementing pay for performance type schemes, which a lot of warehouses are starting to do. Hand in hand with that is some of the gamification stuff that you've seen from Locus and others, right? Where you have a leaderboard and you have very similar to what you have at Peloton, right? Yeah. How you're doing in your warehousing today. And I think this does drive this. I mean, this could be a double-edged sword. I think it can be really a little bit Orwellian, but I think when it's used correctly, it can be super, super effective and very motivating and actually drive retention and better associate performance. So those are kind of some of the principles that we think about. I mean, we're looking at, you know, associate-facing workflows for things like case picking, right? Where we want to have robots assisting in kind of high-cost case-picking operation. How do we direct associates of where to pick and how much, and how do we measure those associate performances? So we are thinking about it at that level. And if you zoom up one level from there, how am I measuring site performance? How am I measuring fleet performance? What's the view that like an ops manager or an executive needs of the site? Again, this is actually very, very similar to what happens at Peloton or Facebook, where you have aggregating large amounts of data across large amounts of data sources, displaying them in different ways, measuring them over time, measuring them over space. So I think these principles are pretty well established in consumer electronics, and they just need to be brought to this industry, right? It's not. I don't think we should accept that, you know, everyone who works in a warehouse to look at a terminal, right? Just a text-based terminal and have only text-based tools. It's just not. It's just why, right? Especially considering the value and size of this market.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's such a great point there. I mean, you know, if we're so tech facing and so tech savvy, or at least, you know, used to tech in our everyday lives, like why does that not translate into our workspace? I mean, I think especially if you look at new generations and, you know, they come into a warehouse that is still, like you said, using like terminal based systems, you know, they're going to be like, what is this? What am I looking at? Right. This is crazy. So,
like working in a warehouse is a very hard job. It's a hard job. But it does, and I think it can be a bad or an undesirable or an exploitative job. But it doesn't have to be, right? And I think like, at the core of this, like anyone who's running a good operation wants to have high satisfaction. I mean, turnover for employees is very expensive. To create you really have to rethink how we want to treat labor and treat employees, and what we do to retain them, how they're paid, how they're compensated, how they are treated, right? And I think the pendulum has to swing back a little bit from this kind of harsh work environment that you're seeing at some of these big facilities, and really be more worker focused. And I don't think automation is the way out of that. Automation should be a way to actually drive more associate engagement, drive associate retention. There's still a little bit of a moment where some people do see the robots as a threat, but I think very quickly they realize that they are a tool, and it makes their jobs better, it makes their jobs more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really good insight from you there, and definitely really appreciate those thoughts there. I mean, I think it's a really interesting conversation and push towards, on the technology side, you know, bringing these user interfaces that we're accustomed to seeing, like we said, in our everyday lives into these space. So very interesting things there. And I'm curious too, I mean, you mentioned like a case picking application there, and you guys recently had a partnership with Geodis, I think focused on case picking. So, I mean, I guess talk to us a little bit about, you guys, you know, prioritize this workflow over the robot, right? So maybe tell us and walk us through, as you approach this partnership with Geodis, how did you look at the workflows and then figure out the robot deployment from those workflows?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as we looked at, as this technology evolves, right, we're trying to figure out how to position it to customers, how to develop and deploy it in a way that makes the most sense, right? So as we have the basic technology getting stable and picking pallets and driving them and dropping them off, picking them at height, dropping them off, these are the things that we've kind of packaged into workflows that make sense for customers. So we want to start with clearing docks, right? We can pick from any dock staging patterns that you can imagine. We can drop off to a myriad of destinations and cross-docking applications, same thing, from dock to dock station to dock station. We start to look at inbound and outbound of ASRS systems, inbound and outbound of pallet wrappers, inbound and outbound from conveyor systems, right? So again, moving from dock staging, moving from end-of-line staging in a manufacturing operation to QA stuff, right? These are sort of the basic operations that happen in these facilities. But when you start to kind of zoom out, again, the biggest cost in terms of labor in most warehousing by far is in the picking operation.
Right.
And this is something that, the each picking side for fulfillment centers has had a lot of investment in automation over the past 5 years over systems like Locus and Six River and others to figure out where, how to better utilize human labor in those operations, right? And so because of the nature of our types of robotic systems, we've identified case picking as a huge opportunity and a huge kind of white space in terms of where automation needs to be deployed. Right. And the key to our system, the key to the thing that we've been developing is basically disassociate the associate with the order. So in a distribution center environment, the typical flow is, let's say it's a warehouse for pet food. Factory, a truckload of cat food comes in, a truckload of dog food comes in, a truckload of fish food comes in, they all get stored. Yeah. And then on the other side of the warehouse, we need to send a mixed pallet of dog food, cat food, fish food to the pet store, right? This is a toy example, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
And so typically what happens is an operator would get a grocery list, get on their end rider, drive through the warehouse, stop at every location and pick the cases, hop back on the end rider, one-to-one relationship with the order and the associate. So you can only process as many orders as you have associates. It's an incredibly inefficient operation, right. Incredibly labor intensive, super unsatisfying work. So what we're doing is with automation, basically creating the association between the order and the robot. So now an order gets initiated, the robot dynamically generates a route to stop at all of those pick locations, right? As it stops at those pick locations, associates are tasked to service the robot. So imagine, this is getting back to that Uber concept I mentioned earlier, where we have a software layer that's coordinating where the robots are and where the humans are, and doing that in the most efficient way possible as determined by our software. So this is the vision that we have for this, and early results are showing that this is almost 200% more efficient than kind of one-to-one operations that we've had in the past. You're seeing better throughput, you're seeing higher quality, you're seeing more reliable operations, you're seeing happier and safer associates, and all of this is at a dramatically reduced cost. So this is exactly the type of thing we're talking about when we're trying to imagine a new type of workflow that's enabled by automation, right? It's enabled by robots. And this is that having that data layer, having the vehicular autonomy, and having intimate knowledge of what they need in these facilities is how we're going to get there.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and it's interesting use case too. I mean, you think about, like you mentioned, the each pick there in the beginning. I mean, you look at that and you would do sort of like a zone pick, but now you're applying that almost to a case pick level, which I think makes a lot of sense, right? It takes away from, having that person tied to one order, and this person has an order that's, this long, and this person has an order that's this short, and, where is this person in this process of completing this order, and being able to coordinate that and figure that out through the platform that you guys have. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And obviously it sounds like you're seeing the results with Geodis. I think it's about double the throughput that they had before, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So we've got this running. One of the Geodis is a large 3PL. We've got this running at one of the Geodis warehouses. Started as kind of a beta, and we started just running second shift, but they've been so happy with it. And they've seen the efficiency gains. They're running it basically all shifts now.
Oh, nice.
And the customer's really happy with it. The associates are very happy with it. And we're really just starting to roll this out at scale. But I think it's going to be a hugely impactful product, and we're pretty excited about it.
Yeah.
It's this idea of, again, kind of comes back to those first principles of how can we use automation to make worker experience better while still giving efficiency to the site. And it really takes advantage of everything that we've built, having really good vehicular automation. Robots are good. We've got the right vehicles that are optimized for case picking. We've got really good user interfaces for the associates on a wearable or through a voice pick system. Good interfaces on the robot to associate the associate with the orders, and then the pivotal command center viewing everything from a safe distance and monitoring and intervening as needed.
Very interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think it makes so much sense, and to put that together too. And I think even from a labor perspective too, if I think about it, you talked about the swing reach driver, and how that's like a skilled position, and needs to have a certain set of skills and training and things to be able to do that. If you're taking that now forklift operation away, then you can essentially have more flexibility in who can you have in that case picking area and who can work on those orders, which I think is certainly helpful, especially in today's labor market. I think that's really interesting. So very interesting stuff with you here, Anthony, and love diving into the user experience, and love the workflow prioritized over the robot itself. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense, and you see the results in that Geodis partnership. So as we look to the future of automation, robotics, within the next year, I mean, what do you see as kind of the next trend that we're moving into as we go into 2024? What do you think is kind of on people's radars or technology that will be coming out that will make a difference?
So looking forward, I'm really hopeful to see a lot more automation in warehousing. And I think the key to that is going to be helping warehouse customers overcome that fear, have confidence in the safety, simplicity, and reliability of these systems. And I hope we can do that by offering them really well-packaged workflows that are aligned with what they're already doing. The other thing I hope we can do in the next 12 to 18 months is really build confidence for everyone who works in these facilities, including the associates, that robots are not an enemy, but actually a really powerful tool to make for a better experience.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially, as we see, like you mentioned, people are realizing they have to get into automation, right? So we need to definitely break down that fear and make it more accessible for them. And I think you guys are doing a great job in being able to do that, and focusing on that human interaction versus just the machine itself. I think that makes a lot of sense. So very interesting to talk to you here, Anthony, and learn more about what Vecna is up to, and also talk about some of these topics within the user experience and overall human interaction with the robots. I think it's a great thing that you guys are focusing on, and definitely interested to see how he continue to evolve and develop the Vecna solutions. If people are interested in learning more about Vecna Robotics, what is the best way to do that?
You can just check out the website, www.vecnarobotics.com.
All right, great. And we'll put that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well, so people can easily find it. So, Anthony, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.